Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Edge. Today we have one of John's friends, somebody I know nothing about, but somebody John knows something about. We have Mr. Julio Perez here. It's great to have you. For our listeners' benefits, give us a little bit of an intro about yourself. Kind of how did you get into the industry? What have you been doing? And let's kind of take a path through your career for a while.
Sure, I will. I'm going to start all the way from the beginning. Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me on. Thank you for inviting me on. That was just incredible. Anytime I get to do a podcast, especially for the community, and to possibly help the next individual coming up, always willing to do that and always appreciative. So thank you very much. But my journey, let's see. Let's start from the jump. So when I was a kid, I was always a tinker. And I think a lot of network engineers, they kind of had that mindset, right? We wanted to tinker. We wanted to build something. Maybe it's Legos. Maybe it's something that's powered. For me, it was more of, I have a game system. How can I improve the internet or Wi-Fi speed to my game system or the signal to my game system, right? Making like an antenna to sort of try to send the waves. This is me as a kid, right? I'm like reading on the internet, like how to improve Wi-Fi, trying to make an antenna and point it to my room because we didn't have a drop over there. Just little things like that. And actually, initially, I wasn't in my, teenage years and high school years, I wasn't even into networking per se. It was more towards drafting and design and sort of architecture. That was really where I thought my life was going in my trajectory. And then sort of in the high school times, your parents kind of ask you, so what's the next step? Like, well, what are you going to do next? Are you going to do college, or are you going to do the military, or university? And kind of at the moment, I didn't really have a plan, right? In my day, I just wasn't too sure. I think just off the top of my head, I just told my dad, oh, I'm thinking about military, maybe Air Force. And he says, oh, that sounds great. And he's kind of just, trusted me in that. And I think I sort of planted that seed in my own mind because it just kind of kept growing. I was like, man, what am I really going to do? So I'm like, you know what? I did mention to my father, the military, I did say Air Force, but I'm going to check out every branch. So I checked out every branch. Naturally, I researched and I landed on the Air Force. And within the Air Force, there's like a recruitment page. And there's a role there that says cyber transport systems. And I was like, whoa, this sounds incredible. And then the military, they like to sort of not battlify or they try to make their title sound very action oriented. So even though I was essentially a network / IT guy, it was cyber transport systems. But realistically, that's what I would relate. It's almost like the closest relation to a network engineer in the military, right? So we're moving packets from point A to B. So yeah, went into the recruiter, started the whole process. I was very fortunate to score a high. So when you're going into the military, you have to do what's called an ASVAB test. It's basically a test that judges what fields you would do good in. They do things like administrative roles or a mechanical based role. Maybe you're going to be a mechanic or work on the airline side or the flight line. Or what I did is I really wanted to score high in electrical. So that specific role that I wanted, you needed to get a fairly high electrical score. So I think I was ultra focused on studying those portions of the ASVAB test. Lucky enough, I got a high score, went into basic training, and got into that role, which was amazing. From there, I did the basic training, finished that, which was required by every service member. And then I went to my initial training or my initial school, which was in Mississippi. So that was 10 months of, what is the electricity? How does it work? Like, what is a circuit? How to wire things, networking, a little bit of switching, configuring devices, getting a packet from point A to B, sort of those exercises for 10 months, which I would imagine just from my counterparts in the military, that's a fairly long training school. A lot of training schools, they might be 1 month to 3 months, something like 10 months is usually reserved for sort of more if you're going into something like special forces or some kind of advanced training like that, where you might go to school for 1 year to 2 years or even beyond that. So yeah, 10 months to me was a very long time to be a student after high school. Again, my young mindset, even though that was an amazing time to be a student. From there, did my military service. For the most part, it was sort of campus switching and routing. Sort of you're assigned to a base, which is essentially like a campus. And then we just did mostly operational, right? So troubleshooting, break fix, day to day. Maybe I'm changing this port to, from a generic user switch port to a printer, right? So day to day stuff, right? Or we're, turning up a new building. Let's configure some switches, get them installed, right? That was kind of the day to day there. I was fortunate enough, and I'm sure we'll get into it a bit deeper here in a moment. Inevitably, your military service, right? There's an endpoint, right? You won't be in the. I mean, if you're fortunate, you won't be in the service your whole life. I was only in for 6 years. I did my service. Very happy with it. But inevitably, it was my time to be a civilian again. So from then, just have a great partner that's been with me forever, and kind of kept pestering me like, hey, you have to get your resume done. You have to get some of your schooling done. And so to get ready, right, to transition from being a civilian to a military, or from a military member to a civilian, did all I needed to do. Sent in some resumes. I was very fortunate to get hired at a great location, which again, we'll probably go over here in a moment. And then got my first introduction into a real civilian side network engineering role, which was incredible. And from there, just went on to do projects, network automation, work with multiple vendors, so on. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And again, we'll deep dive that in a moment. Did that for 5 years, incredible company and coworkers. Yeah, very fortunate that was my first role out of the service. Once that was complete, it's where I am now. I'm with Arista Networks. So yeah, that was my whole spiel. Julio Perez, solutions engineer with Arista Networks. So yeah, after 5 years there, now I'm here. So I've been with Arista for a little bit over a year. I mean, same story, amazing people, amazing company, very fortunate.
So you've raised a lot of points. I've got a lot of questions going around in my head. So it's very curious that you talk about gaming being the place you've kind of started, and the reason why you got interested in tinkered. We speak to a lot of people on the podcast that kind of started off in a similar vein. And I also like the fact that a lot of military people end up in IT or cyber because they have this kind of work ethic. And I'd love to dig a little bit in a second into whether you think work ethic comes from the military, or you think you have a work ethic which leads you to the military.
Oh, interesting.
Because I've never quite figured that out. But I guess, what was it about networking that kind of intrigued you? Like, why did, and I think, to be honest, let's step back a bit. A lot of people tinker when they're younger. I did, John did, you did. And there seems to be a lack of skill in that area at the moment, in networking, in that kind of hardware, in understanding that. And for me, they're the fundamentals. You need to understand how packets move around on your network and move around on the internet, etc., to be able to do really any IT role or any security role. But we don't tinker anymore, or there doesn't appear to be the number of people that tinkered. I used to build my own computers. I would buy all the bits and build them. I would take them apart, put them back together. And I'm sure John did that. In fact, I know John did that. And that grew out of playing with Meccano and playing with Lego. Now we don't see that very often. And John, I guess I'm going to ask you this question.
I think the tinkering has changed. I mean, in the past, it was all hardware based. So if you think back, you built your own computer, or if you want to even go further back, you got out the soldering iron and put a circuit together. I remember doing that as a little kid, building a radio so I could listen to airplanes flying over and maybe catch their transmissions as they were landing at the airport. But I think the tinkering's changed. So it's gone from hardware now to software. And I think that's where a lot of people are spending their time is in coding and building it in a different way. So, but I think, if we kind of talk about Julio's career and what he's doing now, in a sense, he's kind of taken that hardware and now it's into software.
Yeah, I think to answer your question, it's really just about solving a problem. I mean, yes, we might call it like tinkering or building a Lego set, but initially you just have these pieces or these parts, and in the end you get something from that, which in this case is more of you get a working network. But I think really it's just solving a problem whether it's getting two switches to talk to each other, and then you have two PCs and they ping each other, and it's like that moment in your brain, that's that aha moment, like, wow, I got something to work like that. That's fascinating. That's fascinating. Whether it's a software program or you're writing something in Python and you're just learning, but getting it to work or to print something, it's like, wow, that's so cool. And I think it just keeps growing. It just keeps building. You probably tackle more complex problems, as you get better or more knowledgeable.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating really, because we talk quite a lot about there being kind of not enough resources coming into networking and IT. And I'm not sure that's officially true, but I wonder if it's because the tinkering has shifted to software. Because not that I'm saying anything is wrong with developing in software. I think it's good and we need it. But it seems to be the new thing people are doing, and they're not being able to hire a standard networking person. So I'll go back to the question I kind of asked you and then went off on a tangent, as I do. What was it about networking? Did you just kind of fall into it, or was there a specific thing that you wanted to do, or was it just about fixing problems?
I think I looked up other areas of IT, whether it was something like systems or systems administration or server administration or RF signals, and I just something just pulled me towards networking. Whether it was reading the duties or what's involved and the technologies involved, I just gravitated towards networking. I don't really. It's a great question to ask, and it's interesting. I don't have like a concrete like that was it. That was that moment, but it was more of what I felt would be interesting to me for all of the options that were available.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of people started their careers in networking. You did, John. I kind of did. Julio, you did. I wonder now that people aren't starting their careers there, where their careers are going to go. Okay, so let's pivot a little bit back. You came out of the military, as a lot of people in the US do. It's not so common maybe over here in the UK, but it's quite common in the US. Is there any advice you can offer people that are taking that transition from being in the military to taking on their first kind of role outside? Because I know it's particularly difficult for some people to make that transition. What advice would you offer to people?
Sure. There's really folks in two camps when they're transitioning from the military to civilian world. You either in the military did a role that was already sort of IT based, so you kind of have a little bit of background knowledge, or you did a role that has nothing to do with IT, right? Maybe you built bombs, maybe you were a administration role, nothing to do with IT, right? So in those two versions, the path is a little bit different, but either way, some of the things I'll mention are very, very general, right? For one, if you have an inkling that you do want to do something in IT when you get out, I would say start early. Got to hit the books, got to go to school, whether you're going to college or university while you're in the service, because that is possible, right? We have programs and a lot of night classes that you can take advantage of to sort of work towards that goal. Something I discovered way too late in my career, like it's probably everyone thinks about this, I could have started earlier, was something like networking certifications, right? Once I was a civilian, I really hit the books hard to attain network certifications. It's something almost in the world I was living in the military that really wasn't advertised, at least not to me, right? In the communities I was with, that wasn't really the focus. So I think if I had started that earlier, I don't think about it much, but it would be interesting to see like, oh, cool, what else could I have done in that space? That would be one, start early, whether it's in university or in IT certifications, right? And that could be, I mean, that's just a whole another gambit of just which one to get, which vendor, just any and all, whatever suits you. Not any knowledge is good knowledge. Go ahead and just do it, right? So that's one. Now, once you have all of this training and education and you're about that time where, okay, I think I'm ready, something that also happens that I noticed when I was moving on was that a lot of people have been in the service anywhere from 20 years. Well, that's 4 to 20 years that they've never written a resume. They never had to write a resume. Unless something, happens globally, like you're not losing your job in the military. So that's not something, or obviously you don't do something personally that affects your service in the military. That's not something you worry about. So one thing would be write a resume, give it to someone, maybe someone not in the service, right? Maybe some of your friends that are having their own careers in the civilian side, have them look at it. Maybe use a resume service to just review your resume. That's one. And the other one would be same thing with resumes. You also haven't really had to interview for any role in all of those years. So practice interviewing, whether it's going online and reading interview questions. I think there's sites like Glassdoor where not only folks can post salaries, but also I went for this role and was asked these types of questions. Well, just go through the questions, be like, well, can I answer that? This is the role I want. Do I know this knowledge? Do I think I know this knowledge, but I really don't? That would be huge. And then the last one, which I kind of poked at, is the other piece that folks, I think, always forget about is salary negotiations. That is huge. I think, more people should negotiate salary, and especially coming from the military, you don't really, your salary is sort of decided for you depending on your rank. There's no negotiation there. So I would imagine naturally when you're going to the civilian side, you're just, well, this is the offer sheet I got, so that is what it is, and I'll just sign it and I'm good to go. When realistically, you should just research salary negotiations, be respectful, don't go, wild, and someone offers you whatever number and you double it. Like, well, that's a little much there. Maybe do some legwork, do some studying, and ask for something reasonable.
I think that's very valid. I mean, I wish salaries were a bit more kind of obvious when you applied for a job. I think there's too much smoke and mirrors, but that's a whole different debate. But I think the advice you said about interview and practice, I had somebody approach me the other day at an event and say, like, what advice do you give me on interviewing? And I said, the honest advice is interview for jobs. There's no better practice than actually going interview for jobs. However, you will
100%.
get knocked back quite a lot. There's a good chance, unless you're very, very lucky and you get your first ever job, you are likely to get quite a lot of no's as you become better. But treat it as practice. Go away, write down what you could have done better, try and get feedback from the people that have said no, which is really, really hard. A lot of them don't do that, but try your best to get feedback. And don't think that no means everything. It means that you are going to get better and better and better. And it's actually a closer step to a yes. I'm going to pivot slightly and kind of ask John a question here. So I believe, John, you hired Julio when he came out of military, right?
Yeah.
So,
he joined our team.
The question I'm going to ask you is, what was it about Julio that made you hire him? Because that, I think, would be good advice for people in his position. What was it that you liked as a hiring manager that made you hire him? Or not made you, but what was the reason behind that? What was it about him that appealed? And I'm sorry to drop you right on.
Wow, dude. Really, I think it's showing up in this podcast. I mean, we've got somebody like Julio who's very curious, and he's also got a strong drive in him. So when we interviewed him originally, we could see that. We could see the potential there, that, he could be on our team, be successful. And the odd thing is that the story behind it is we had a network engineer that left us. He was a kind of a mid-level engineer. And when I looked at the team, I was like, shoot, we don't really have a lot of entry-level folks. So the deal I brokered with our CIO was like, I'm going to trade this top-level position in for 2 entry-level positions. And at the time, we only had approval for one of those hires. The second one was still coming. And so when we interviewed Julio, we were also interviewing another person. Her name was Amanda. And we were trying to decide who to hire first. And fortunately, around the same time that we got approval to hire Amanda, we also got approval to hire that second person, and that was Julio. And both of those hires were based on just looking at the person, their drive, who they were, how they answered the questions. You could see that there was a lot of thought process there. And as well, one of the things we instilled within our team was this culture of mentoring. So the top level, senior level engineers knew they had to work with our junior level engineers, our entry level engineers, and train them up on the technologies that we were starting to work on. And we'll get into that a little bit. But I think that's one of the reasons it was successful, because Julio had all the talent there and just needed to be molded. And we had the right people to help him in his career. And looking, at Julio today and where he started, that was hugely successful. He's just taken off, and I can't say enough about where Julio is today and all the success he's had.
So I think you've raised, and the reason I asked you the question is because I kind of know you well enough to know what your answer was going to be. But I think what's important is when we were hiring people back then, both myself and you, we had senior people, junior people, mid-sized people, and we could kind of throw them into the melting pot and everyone could help everyone else. And everyone was quite comfortable in doing that.
I don't know about that. I mean, there are times when you bring somebody in and they can be junior, and the senior level people either ignore them or they feel like they're being threatened. So I think it comes down to leadership and instilling that culture of mentoring in there and saying, this is a good thing for you. So when you do have that outage, you can, help this person be successful, and you might have an opportunity to sleep through the night. So I think it's a leadership thing.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And I mean, I tried to instill that as well in the team that I had. But I wonder if that's why there is an issue at the moment hiring cyber talent, because there's such a small amount of cyber talent that there isn't a team that can help each other. Usually a company will have one or maybe two cyber people. That's starting to change. But they're trying to find that kind of unicorn because they need someone to do everything. Whereas we had the luxury maybe of having a bit more of a wider team where we had the ability to hire someone and help mold them and help train them. And if they made the odd mistake, it didn't matter. Whereas when you've only got one person on the team, that person needs to be amazing. And I know we digress slightly. But John, I'll pass over to you and you can ask a question.
Yeah, Julio, how do you feel about it? What is your perspective on this?
Sure. I have just one point that John mentioned with the role was a junior network engineering role. Now, mind you, I'm coming off of this as 6 years in the military doing sort of this role, but different, right? So the military is on the civilian side, different technologies, so on and so forth. But another tip, and this goes for civilian or military, is in some ways you have to humble yourself. You can't have this thought of like, I'm too good for this position. Like, there's nothing wrong with taking a junior network engineering role and growing, right? I think a lot of folks, they want to sort of, in their minds, they might have a starting point where they think, I should be here. And you might be turning down a lot of incredible roles that you can grow into and blossom and learn. That's my advice is don't be shy about looking at, like for example, a junior network engineering role.
I think that's good advice as well, because it's hard to break into the industry. And if you think you can break
100%.
in 3/4 of the way up the ladder, maybe you're aiming too high. But again, John, over to you.
Yeah. So Julio, let's talk a little bit about networking and the changes that were going on at the time that you joined our team back in the day. So we kind of progressed from really pushing packets to moving to the scaling of the network. So software-defined networking, SD-WAN, and then automation. Can you talk to me a little bit about that change and how you saw it, and as well as how it's impacted your career?
Yeah, so in the beginning of the network at that position, and even in the military, it's very, very manual, very snowflake design. Once I started this role, and very early on, we were going down the path of like SDN, SD-WAN, automation. We were all on board. And for me, that was, everything was new, right? Well, what's a controller? We have a single point of management or of configuring the network. Like, that was mind blowing for me. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense in my head. But in reality, right, that's about scaling the network, being consistent. And introducing automation into that. And so from there early on, not only even in those, those technologies, but also just multi-vendor, right? A lot of roles, it's just we're this vendor shop or that vendor shop. But I was thankful early on in the career, I got to touch a lot of different vendors, whether it's from firewalls, switching and routing, branch deployments, right? A lot of different technologies, wireless. So I was lucky. And then from there, introducing automation. So we want to have a generic design, so to speak, for, in this case, it was like a retail environment, and we want to automate it. So early on, the whole team actually, see, this is how it works. It has to come from leadership. So from leadership, it was, let's automate the network. And at that moment in time, and even still, Ansible was the tool of choice. It sort of, in a lot of spaces, it really dominates the field. So we went down the path of Ansible and automating our network configurations, automating our branch deployments. And that was definitely a turning point in my career, from going from manual CLI changes and that mindset to, well, instead of deploying all of this manually, like, I'm going to write a Jinja template or an Ansible playbook, or maybe use their platform. It used to be called Tower, now it's Ansible Automation Platform, or to really have these consistent deployments, right? We're not troubleshooting all of these simple, well, simple is relative, but these common errors that might be introduced by a manual configuration, right? Sort of automating these processes, reducing errors, and having more consistency. I think that was a huge change in my career.
So what are some of the areas, so if you're out there and you're looking to get into automation, what are some of the starting points? What are some of the things that you kind of need to know to move forward and down that path and be successful?
Yeah, especially for network automation, I would say if you're getting started, and I think some folks think that if you are going down this route, you have to be this expert and know all the ins and outs. And to just get something done and be successful, it could be very beginner, intermediate level. You don't have to go crazy advanced. But I started with Ansible, and then later down the road, picked up a little bit of Python. I would say if you're starting this journey, it would maybe benefit you more if you start with a programming language, whether in Python seems to be the popular one just because it's easy to read, a lot of resources paid and free, because once you know the intricacies of a programming language, or loops and functions and if statements, all these things, these constructs are the same no matter what platform or framework you're going to use. So you'll be able to leverage that knowledge, even if it's at a beginner level, to use other frameworks even better or more efficiently.
What are some of the newer frameworks? So we talked a little bit about Ansible, Python, but obviously, technology moves forward.
Sure.
And you seem to be kind of at the cutting edge of a lot of the automation. What are some of the things you're seeing come forward?
Even just stick with Ansible just a little bit longer. In Ansible, they just introduced this thing called event-driven EDA, event-driven automation, or event-driven Ansible. Might get those two confused, but it's essentially something happens in the network, and I've either developed these what they call rule books to react to this event. It could be either healing the network, creating a ServiceNow ticket, right? Doing actions for the operator instead of you having to perform the actions. For example, maybe we have an event and BGP is down. Okay, I see that event. Well, now I would commonly run these certain subset of commands, whether it's show me my neighbors, show me my interfaces connected to that neighbor, is it down, right? Performing these actions for us. So then either to remediate or to just gather information for me. So once that comes in, I have all this information. I could, as a network engineer, I can look at this and figure out what the issue is. So that's one aspect I've seen coming up. Another one is, even for the most part, Python has, even in network automation, has really dominated, whether it's the libraries or the packages within Python, or there's even frameworks within Python like Nornir that are written specifically for network automation. But I think for more scale and speed, there is already little rumblings of network engineers picking up the Go programming language. So I think that will become more and more popular in the future. There's, to toot our own horn, we have a framework ourselves. called Arista AVD. So again, I work for Arista Networks. And that's a great representation of a framework to simplify network deployments. So it's whether it's having as little of input from the user to generate and build a network fabric, right? So if more and more frameworks come out like this, right, we can simplify the operator's life. So those are just a few, right? So there's AVD, Go is going to be popular, Python's going to continue to rise. I think there's going to be some shifts in with the Ansible and EDA. I think that was really interesting to look at. Yeah.
See,
So
I was going to say, I see automation is firstly kind of reducing that human error, because we are all human, and obviously it speeds up deployments, but also it helps with the user experience. I mean, you were talking there about things like self-healing, I guess, like trying to fix a problem automatically, and or at least collecting enough information to make it easier.
Sure.
How does kind of security have an effect on automation? I mean, we're talking a lot at the moment about things like zero trust, and we talk about networks kind of being open, and we've designed them flat and pretty much give everyone access to everything. Is that having an effect on automation and networking in general?
I think from just the little area that I sit in, it's more of, and this is more from like developer speak, it's more of like code analysis. Is your code safe? What you're developing, is it tested? That's really where our aspects of security, or my security mindset comes in. Another thing could be if we're developing something and it is for a security use case, well, what can we build in to simplify, either whether it's configuration or validations that is right? Can this object 1 talk to object 2? Is that valid, right? Is that in my test plan? That's really where security comes in my world.
Because we definitely, I mean, obviously automation is great. It speeds things up. But equally, if somebody hacks that automation tool and they can speed up automating something not great, then there's a risk there as well, right? But John,
there's even a bigger discussion. There's even a bigger discussion of a lot of this tooling, for the most part, whether there's some vendor specific stuff, but a lot of it is open source, right? So this whole thought of like, well, is this code safe that I'm going to use in my environment? So then, just to advise for individuals is look out for code coverage. Is it maintained? Is it from a trusted body? Those are things to look out for, right? Whether it's just one person, and one person can write an amazing framework, mind you, it would be a lot of work, but just check, how's that person's reputation? Are they within the community? Do they communicate with everyone? Or is this sort of a random framework I found that I know nothing about, but I want to use it in my network? That might be something to look out for.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. But John, I jumped in on you as you were going to ask.
No, so I had a question in terms of automation, and something we haven't talked about. And every time you open up the internet or you go to a technical site, AI pops to mind. What are you seeing in terms of AI and automation? Are you starting to play with that inside your labs, or is that still something you see in the future?
Not personally. I have a few coworkers that have dabbled in it, and I think the initial opinion is that AI could be used as a tool to help us, right? Maybe I'm writing a program and there's some generic functions I need to write. Well, maybe I can just ask the AI to write those for me, right? I don't have to write them out in 1,000 lines of code, and hopefully the AI can do that, right? Because those are sort of I don't want to call them like default functions, but they're sort of baked into what you need, right? Whether it's trusting the AI completely to take over a network, heal my network, I don't know if we're there yet. And then there's another conversation of, let's say we ask just AI, whether it's something like ChatGPT or whatever it may be, I want you to write me a config or do something to make these 2 nodes talk. Well, if that's wrong, and you as a network engineer don't know that it's wrong, well, now there's like a problem there. Now we're trusting this AI who's not completely accurate, something's wrong, and now you've pushed that to the network, and you yourself didn't know that was wrong. So now how can you troubleshoot the network? So we're in an interesting phase for sure in networks and network automation with the boom of AI. But I think it's going to need some time, especially for trust. trusting that to take over. There are, some use cases, right? Maybe you can recognize patterns and either alert or sort of remediate. That would make sense, but completely taking over a network, we're probably not at Skynet just yet.
I hope not. So it sounds like a lot of it, what it comes down to is knowing your fundamentals. You've got to understand how a packet gets from point A to point B, the routing protocols, all the things that go into a configuration, as well as, how it works on a Juniper device versus Cisco device versus a Arista device, and so on and so forth. One of the other things I kind of wanted to talk to you about is, so you've made the transition from the military to corporate, and then you move from corporate to the vendor side, which is something Jaye and I have also done. Advice for people looking to make that change: is that a good change? Is it a bad change? What is your kind of your feedback?
Sure. I'll answer this, but I would love to hear both of y'all's feedback as well, just of your own experience. Okay, so for myself, very different. For example, when you're working for an enterprise or even for the military, that is your customer, right? That is my team. Everyone here is, we're all on the same team. We're here to help each other and get this to work. But then when you're on the vendor side, yes, you have your team, but now you have all these customers. So it's not used to be just one. No, now it could be hundreds or thousands or whatever it may be. I think it's interesting. I think depending on your role on the vendor side, some roles are more internal, maybe more development, behind the scenes, very important. And some are more maybe public facing, whether it's something like a developer advocate or things like you do, John, right? You're out there in the public, you're talking to people or training them up on different strategies or techniques for their networks. And even for me, or either running something like a workshop for in network automation, that's very different than what I did when I worked for an enterprise. Now I'm speaking in front of customers, and that could be anything from 20 to 60 people in a room, which I might be, I'm on this podcast and I'm talking, but for me, that's very, right? You kind of start to sweat a little, like that's a lot of people to be talking for anyone, right? For anyone speaking to a crowd. So they're on the public facing side, there's that aspect to it. But from the vendor side, I think you start to see there's so many pieces involved to do a thing, whether it's to release a feature, develop something, a customer requests something. There's a huge pipeline just to get that in, right? Maybe from the customer side, it's more of, this isn't working or this feature doesn't exist. I want that. I'm like, but it takes a lot of work and a lot of people to get that to work. So you kind of see that on the vendor side, see that process. But you also get to see everything. Well, you get to see the sneak peek of everything that's coming up, which is really fascinating. That's, to be released. But one thing I should note is that same thing on the enterprise space, amazing individuals, amazing network engineers. But I feel like when you go to any vendor, you're working next to individuals that are writing RFCs or developing just these amazing frameworks, or even that are working on the code base for your switching or routing platform. I think that just blows my mind that you can just message this individual that so fast. It's just incredible. Or if you want a question answered, you can talk to the very person that wrote the code that's on the box. Like that is just amazing. So that's a little bit different on the vendor side, right? Going from, public side to vendor side.
It's funny. I think you raised some really good points. John doesn't like me saying this, but I was on the customer side a long time, right? 25 plus years. So I can't help, no matter what situation I'm put in, the customer hat gets put on my head because that's the most familiar I am. That's the default setting. There are pros and cons of that. I think the role that myself and John do, we are able to empathize with the customers because that's what we've done for that period of time. And I don't believe the answer to every problem is going buy more tech. Technology helps. I'm a nerd, I'm a geek. I know technology helps, but for me, there's more to it than that. There's the people, the culture, you have to budget, you've got resource issues. There's a lot of struggles that companies go through. And what I didn't realize until I was on the vendor side is not many people on the vendor side understand that. And that I don't mean that to sound bad. They're trying to sell products. They believe in their product, as do all of us on the vendor side. We believe in the product or we wouldn't be selling it. But they don't necessarily know it's not all about just buying that product. They don't necessarily know what goes on behind that. And for me, seeing that and being able to be the interface between what's happening on the customer or prospect side and what's happening internally, and kind of try and bridge that and explain to both sides of the party what's happening, I think is great, because that never happened so much 20 years ago or even 15 years ago. And this kind of rise of the kind of tech evangelist or field CTO or whatever you want to name that role has really helped that. And I think people are learning. And John, I'll hand to you. I don't know what you think. I certainly enjoy it on the vendor side. I want to say that.
No, I mean, yeah, I enjoy it on the vendor side. And a lot of it comes down to helping people on their journeys and showing them the scars and the bruises that I've accumulated over the years, and helping them to avoid those pitfalls and not have to deal with some of the heartache that I had to deal with on my journey. And I think that's the piece that for me is the most rewarding, is when I can help somebody through a problem and lead them down to a better path, so they don't accumulate the scar tissue that I've had. In terms of the pros, a lot of it comes down to I sleep at night. So instead of that 3 a.m. call that I was getting for so long of an outage or on a holiday, that to me is definitely in the pros. On the con side, it's not being able to work with amazing people like Julio on a regular basis, because that was, for me, was really what it was about. It was about the team, putting together the team, having the team execute, and doing some really cool stuff. That's the piece I think that I miss the most, is being with those folks on the front lines and spending my day there. It was such a joy.
It's interesting how that's.
I was going to say, for me, it goes right back to one of the first things we said on this podcast, was it's about fixing problems. So I think we all do what we do because we enjoy fixing problems. So for me, I enjoyed fixing problems in the corporate world, but there's only so many problems you can fix. And don't get me wrong, you can never fix them, or IT world changes. The reason I kind of pivoted to the vendor side was it gave me the ability to help more people fix more problems. And I mean, that may sound like a funny reason, but I know the pain people are going through, as does John, as do you. We know what they're living and breathing every day. And if I can just help one person per day, put a smile on their face and help them not be up until 3 o'clock in the morning, then I feel like I've done my bit, which sounds very odd, but that's the truth, right? We're slightly running out of time. It's been great, as always, talking to a guest, and it's been great talking to you. So I'm going to ask you one fun question, and then I'll let John ask you one. Mine's always going to include food because I love it, and I always ask the same question. What's been your best food experience? And it doesn't necessarily mean that the food was the best. Please don't mention pineapple on pizza, because it will be the end of the podcast.
For sure.
But what's been your best food experience? And that could be the people you were with, the venue you were at, or anything like that, not necessarily the food.
I have a little bit of recency bias. So my wife and I recently took a trip we went to Rome for the first time. Just amazing. I would recommend everyone visit Rome. It's just beautiful. There's a neighborhood in Rome, and I apologize if I'm butchering it, for it's Trastevere, I believe is the name of the neighborhood. And it's a very old school neighborhood, a lot of history, a lot of great places to eat. Even the way the neighborhood looks is just beautiful. And there's eateries everywhere, and it's tight, very tight walkways. but really any restaurant there, but I can't even tell you the restaurant's name just because we were just exploring, but just that going on that walk, finding that neighborhood, that sitting down, that atmosphere, some house red wine, a little bit of carbonara. I mean, it's just beautiful. It's just a beautiful moment.
That is a fantastic area of Rome. I had the luxury of working in Rome quite a lot. Both the last companies I worked for had sites there. And funnily enough, yeah, I mean, the atmosphere in that area is amazing. And yes, it's quite touristy now, and it never used to be like that. So
Sure.
you may pay a little bit more, but just being able to sit there in the buzz, and it's warm generally. You get to sit outside. There's great pasta, great pizza, great ice cream. A very good choice. So John, let's hand to you for one final question.
You know where I'm going to go, Julio. Cider. So what ciders is Julio drinking these days? I know that's a passion of yours.
My favorite cider all time is, out of a lot of them are going to be local, so I apologize, but Alter Ego cider, incredible cider out of Portland. Shilling, anything from Shilling. So I gravitate towards, John knows me, but I gravitate towards a lot of more like sweeter cider. There's dry ciders that are excellent for folks with that palate. Not for me. I'm very much on the semi-sweet, sweet scale. So anything I recommend, just assume it's going to be on the sweet side. But yeah, those are some of my favorites.
And have you ever had English cider?
I have. I had I think a pear cider. I went to the UK. Stopped by a pub. I wish I remember the name, but anytime I went to a pub, maybe
it was called Magners, maybe.
Probably.
Yeah.
And any pub we went to, I just defaulted to cider. I don't have a bad cider experience in the UK, so it was really good.
Yeah, the area that I live in or came from originally was famous for its cider. So next time you're in the UK, let me know. But I think that's a wrap. I really appreciate you coming on. It's great to speak to you as always. John, anything you want to add before we wrap?
No, man, Julio, it's always a pleasure to chat with you.
No, thank you. Thank you both. Thank you for having me on. It's been an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you.